friends. I want to welcome you today to Meadowside Nature Center's Come to Your Senses series, where we talk with nature experts on what they know about living and learning with the environment. Today we have joining us Jim Monsma, the Director of City Wildlife, based here in Washington, D.C. Jim, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, no, thanks for having me. It's my pleasure.
Great. Oh, so I'm really excited to hear a little bit more about City Wildlife. Can you tell us a little bit about what the work is that your organization does?
Yes, it grew out of a bunch of us who have been, well, really two majors, but some other people that have been involved in animal welfare in Washington, D.C. for a long time, and realizing that Washington's a pretty good place to be an animal in terms of the law and the services available, except for wildlife. There was absolutely nothing available for wildlife. So, in a moment of weakness, we decided, well, we could probably do something about that. Let's open a wildlife rehabilitation clinic, and that was in 2008, and it took until 2013 to get the clinic open. But here we are, and we are the first and still the only wildlife rehabilitation clinic that the District of Columbia has ever known. And we do have a couple of other projects besides the clinic, which I guess you're going to talk to the coordinators about at a later date. But the core of our business is still the wildlife rehabilitation clinic.
Fantastic. Yeah, we're excited to speak with the other projects that City Wildlife has going as well. So that we can learn a little bit more about the rehab clinic, with such a big mission and you all being the point of contact. Tell me, what does like an average day look like for all of you?
Well, there are no average days, in this kind of business. We're not like a business, and there aren't appointments or anything like that. We never know what's going to show up. But it is very seasonal, so that we have slow seasons and busy seasons. And our busiest month is May, and the summer is generally busiest. We'll have like 150 animals here at the center during the summer, but in the winter, we could have 20, maybe 30, but as low as 20. And intake could be as high as 30 or so animals in the summer day, and in the winter, one or two. And it's all driven by the babies who get orphaned. Wild animals they know they're not going to be a lot of survivors, so they just have tons of babies. But our basic reason for being is that we've built an environment here in the city and everywhere in the country that works very well for us. It's pleasant and it's convenient. We have our roads, we have our lawnmowers, we have our big, beautiful plate glass windows that let the sunshine in. We have poisons to keep the animals we don't like out of our lives, and we have chainsaws and all these other things. Well, none of this works well for animals. It makes it very nice for us, but as I like to say, it turns the life of an animal into an obstacle course where every day they are threading their way between these various obstacles. Any mishap would land them in serious trouble and land them with us. And almost all of the animals we see are victims of some sort of human caused malady, be that pets, or they've hit windows, or they've been hit by a car, or they've been poisoned, that sort of thing.
Well, it sounds like you see a little bit of everything come in through the clinic, which is, I can't even imagine what it's like to have to try and meet the needs, especially in the springtime, like you were mentioning. I do wonder a little bit about intervening. I mean, when it comes to the average person going out for a walk with their dog, they see an animal on the ground, maybe a baby bird or a squirrel or something. What's best practice when it comes to intervening? How do they know when to act and what to do?
That you raise a really good question, because this is something we're not taught in school. And most people have had no exposure to how to help a wild animal, or even how to determine if a wild animal needs help. They've got no. So we always encourage people to call, and we do have someone on the phone whenever we're open, which is 9 to 5 every day of the year, holidays, weekends. And we'll ask you a lot of questions. And please be patient. The idea is to try to determine if the animal needs help. because and if you don't do that telephone work, you end up with a lot of animals walking in the door that don't need to be here, and it still happens. And we send them right back to their mom and their dad. But we can certainly curtail a lot of that. And we keep pretty good statistics, well, pretty good statistics on everything. And it turns out that about 3 out of 7, it always seems to work out to that ratio. 3 out of 7 animals can be helped over the phone, and the other 4 out of 7 have to come to the center.
Wow, that's amazing. So that making that first call is just a really important first step, I can see.
Yeah, there's a lot of education that has to happen. I don't know how many times per day during the summer we have the fledgling conversation. I
Right.
blame Walt Disney. People watch the movies and they see the bird sit on the edge of the nest and say, "Okay, I'm off to make my fortune," and fly off into the sunset. That's nice on Walt Disney, but that's not how it works in your backyard. In your backyard, I'll have the conversation. I get on autopilot. Um, just like learning to swim, you have to jump in the pool, but that doesn't mean you can swim. If you're a bird that wants to learn to fly, you got to jump out of the nest, but that doesn't mean you can fly just because you're in the lawn. And it takes about a week. And at first, it looks pretty messy. They're bumping into walls and hanging upside down off your bushes, and people see that and are aghast. And oh my gosh, I got to help this poor thing. But it's a stage they go through. Uh, so we have that conversation a lot, but a lot of times people will say, "Oh, the bird can't fly," and we've learned. And I don't mean to be flip about people. It's nice. They care. They're trying to help. They're doing their best. But they call and they will say, "I have an injured bird in my backyard." And if you ask, "Oh, can you please describe the nature of the bird's industry?" They'll say, and they have nothing to say. Because in fact, the bird isn't injured. They assume if it can't fly, it's injured. But in fact, it's not injured at all. It just can't fly. It's a matter of age, not injury. So you have to work with people, and they're generally very grateful to be told how this works in nature, but because they don't know.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, that's fantastic. I know we definitely here in Montgomery County rely on our wildlife rehabbers to give us direction, even here in the parks, sometimes when we find animals we think may or may not be injured. So definitely a big appreciation goes out to all of you doing that work. I do want to ask you, in terms of like wildest story, do you guys have something that you may or may not have expected to hear in terms of an urban wildlife run-in with humans in the DC area?
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty wild business. You never know what's going to happen, to be honest. And you get the same story over and over and over and over and over again. But then every once in a while, something comes out of the blue. We once got 3 horseshoe crabs that some guy walked out of his house in the middle of DC, the sort of suburban section where they have lawns, and found 3 horseshoe crabs on his lawn. No idea how they got there. Still don't. Of course, the horseshoe crabs ended up here, and when we got them back to the bay, but we didn't know how to take. We had to scramble because we had never gotten horseshoe crabs before. Didn't know how to take care of them. So there's that kind of thing. Or some guy was walking down one of the streets on Capitol Hill, and somebody threw a softshell turtle out the window and
Oh,
landed in a flower box. And luckily this guy saw it and helped it. But there are plenty of wild stories, of just bizarre things happening that you would, if I wrote a book, no one would believe me.
horseshoe crabs raining, yeah, down onto the lawn. I wouldn't know it, or turtles. That's incredible. Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure you see all kinds of things walk in, and all kinds of calls. I'm wondering, do you think that there is something that you wish that people knew about their impact on wildlife?
Yeah, I do. That the times are changing and they will continue to change. And our generation and the people going forward are going to have to decide if we want these wild animals to continue to be a part of our world, part of our community, or not. I'm old enough that I grew up with, box turtles and various wild animals, birds that were in my yard and whatnot. And it was just a given. Nobody worried about, making sure that those animals, they took care of themselves and we took care of ourselves and all worked out. But at this point, we're going to have to work hard. It's going to take a conscious decision. It's going to take conscious efforts. It's going to take a lot of lifestyle changes if we want to have those animals share our community, for the sake of our children and grandchildren and great grandchildren, it's not going to happen automatically. We're going to have to change our ideas about what kind of lawns we have around our house, what kind of plants we put in our garden. We're going to have to change our ideas about what we eat. We're going to have to change our ideas about, well, lots of ways that we live, just to ensure that these animals will have a fighting chance. Because the way things are going now is not good. And there will always be starlings, and there will always be house sparrows. But, if you read this book, Springtime in Washington from the 1950s, I think it was written about, the guy said, you can't go anywhere in Washington without seeing Kentucky warblers in the bushes. Well, now Kentucky warblers have not been seen in the district outside of migration in years and years and years, But on the other hand, there used to be no deer. Now there are deer all over. So the population is changing. But if you want that kind of diversity, it's going to take concerted and intentional efforts on our part. And a wildlife rehabilitation is only one part. We have to make sure that when we fix up an animal and get it back to the wild, that the wild has what that animal needs to sustain itself, that there are the food and the shelter and the clean water, etc., the nesting places. So we have to preserve habitats, but we have to, at this point, preserving the habitats in the parks is important, critical, super important. But we have to build habitat. We have to make sure that our lawns are now working, because there just isn't enough parks and stuff. You can't assume that the parks are going to be enough to keep wildlife going. They're not. They need our yards. So you're going to have to start planting native plants if this is important to you.
Absolutely. And, we see the huge impact even in our park systems of, plants that were put in by developers nearby. We get invasives that come through into the parkland easily because of, runoff and, wildlife traversing it in through as well. So yeah, it's a whole system. We can't keep it segregated, right? So we need to keep building together. I really appreciate your perspective on that, because you unfortunately see the negative impacts a lot that we've been having on wildlife. I'm wondering, in terms of value to wildlife, other than like beauty, or for somebody who loves nature, just like myself, is there some ecosystem services that urban wildlife really play into the daily lives of people in Washington, D.C. that maybe you might want to share in terms of what their value is to keeping D.C. healthy?
Well, yeah, that's a hard question for me, because I am of the mindset that wildlife is of value for being wildlife. And I know that there is that people will say, well, we need the bees to pollinate our plants to make food for us. And we need opossums because they eat ticks and keep us safe. And there's a lot of that around. But I think that we've sort of got to start thinking, for me, my opinion, we've sort of got to start thinking differently about wildlife, that wildlife exists to be wildlife. And we're all part of this community, and they belong and we belong, and we've got to make space for everybody, because it is one community. And it doesn't matter that one can read and one can't read, and how powerful you are or how ugly you are or how cute you are. We're all in this together. And there are those of us that believe there's got to be space for everybody, and we've got to work at that. And and that would include mosquitoes. I mean, I don't like getting bit, but this is our community, and we're all we form one whole. And I think that's the way we've got to start changing. And it is changing. That's the amazing thing. When I was growing up, I'm in my 60s now. You were driving down the road and somebody hit an animal. They didn't stop and say, oh my goodness, I better help this thing. But nowadays, lots of people do. There's still some that don't, I'm sure, but it seems a rare thing. Somebody comes across a hurt bird lying. Their first thing is, who do I call? And that's a marvelous thing. And maybe the bird needs help, maybe it doesn't. But this instinct to, oh, I've got to help, is a wonderful change. And it's new in my lifetime, but it's a change in the right direction. And I don't think that those people, and there are more of them every day, and particularly the kids, because even if dad doesn't want to stop and help the kid, help the bird, the kids are going to make sure dad stops and helps that bird. The kids got the control in this situation. So and so I think that that is changing, so that people are not saving those birds because they eat mosquitoes. People are not saving the opossums because they eat ticks. Although there are good reasons to do that, and I'm not going to argue, but they save the bird because it's a bird, and they save the opossum because it's an opossum, and because it deserves to live, and because beyond that, we have made their life that much more tenuous, and maybe we have a little bit of a responsibility to help them over these rough moments, give them another chance.
Jim, I love it. Thank you so much. To me, you're really honing in on the whole purpose of these conversations, helping us come to our senses and really understand where we fit in terms of our connection with wildlife and their innate value. So I just want to thank you so much. Do you have any other thoughts or parting words you'd like to give the people of Montgomery County, your neighbors?
No, it's just there are wildlife rehabilitators around. I think it's sort of like animal shelters. It used to be there were plenty of communities that didn't have animal shelters. Now there are none, as far as I could tell. Every community's got an animal shelter, and I think the same thing is happening with wildlife um, rehabilitators. But we only exist because people support us, and we can only do as much as we have resources to do, and the resources come from the public. So part of, not the whole answer to saving wildlife, but part of it has certainly got to be connect with your local wildlife rehabilitator wherever you are, um, and see if you can get involved. Some kind of way, volunteer, donate, spread the word, whatever you can do. We will appreciate the help. And of course, to the animals, it makes all the difference in the world. It's life or death.
Jim, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and best of luck with everything that you do at City Wildlife. I know you're making a huge difference in the district.
Thanks, Tiffany. Appreciate your interest, and thanks for having us.